Come closer. The shadows have missed you, and tonight they have a new story to tell. Welcome to Scary Stories After Dark. Tom Ellery preferred movement. Not the chaos of it, never that. Not airports with their delays and loudspeakers or taxis weaving unpredictably through crowded streets. No. He preferred controlled movement, measured, scheduled, contained, the kind that ran on rails. The train hummed beneath him, low, steady, and almost soothing. It was a constant vibration through polished wood and brass fixtures, through the glass in his hand, and through the very bones of his wrist where it rested against the table. Everything about the carriage felt intentional. Soft amber lighting pooled overhead, warm enough to soften edges without dimming clarity. Conversations murmured at a respectful volume, while silverware chimed gently against porcelain. Somewhere behind him, a quiet laugh rose and dissolved just as easily. Order. Tom exhaled slowly, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. On time, on track, exactly as it should be. Then the glass trembled, just slightly. Not enough to spill, and certainly not enough to draw attention, but it was enough. Tom's eyes flicked down. The clear liquid inside his tumbler shivered once, then stilled. He waited, but the train continued its steady glide. There was no lurch, no shift in speed, nothing that should have caused it. Everything to your liking, sir? The voice arrived before he registered her presence. It was smooth even, and measured in a way that felt practiced but not rehearsed. Tom looked up. The hostess stood beside his table, hands folded neatly at her waist. Her uniform was immaculate. Dark fabric pressed to perfection, white apron crisp, every line exactly where it should be. Her posture was flawless. Her expression was pleasant, neutral, and professional. There was something about her stillness that felt deliberate, as if she had been standing there longer than he'd noticed, watching. Yes, Tom said, after a beat. His voice sounded normal, grounded. Everything is fine. She held his gaze, not too long, not too short, but exactly the right amount of time. Then she gave a small, efficient nod and stepped away. Tom watched her go for a moment longer than necessary before turning back to his drink. The surface was still now, perfectly smooth. Outside, rain traced thin, steady lines down the window. He hadn't even noticed it start. The sky beyond was a deep, muted gray, the kind that flattened distance and swallowed detail. The glass distorted the world just enough to make everything feel slightly removed. Contained. Suddenly, a drop landed on his hand. Tom frowned and looked up. The ceiling above him was spotless, polished wood, uninterrupted, and gleaming faintly under the warm light. Another drop fell, cool, precise. It struck the back of his hand in the exact same place. He stilled and waited. Nothing, no leak, no visible source. Across the aisle, a man lifted his glass, paused, set it down, and then lifted it again, the same motion. Exact, repeated. Tom blinked, but the man continued speaking to the woman across from him, his tone light, conversational, and unchanged. But the gesture was too identical, too clean. The train shuddered. Hard. The lights flickered once, twice, then cut. Silence swallowed the carriage whole. No voices, no movement, no hum beneath his feet. Tom didn't breathe. Something cold pressed against his ankle. Darkness stretched too far, and the aisle felt longer now. Endless. The carpet beneath his shoes was wet, and somewhere, deep in the distance, there was a shape. Still, watching. The lights snapped back. Sound rushed in. Laughter, glass, and conversation. The steady hum returned beneath him. Tom sat exactly where he had been. His drink was untouched, his sleeve was dry, and the carriage remained unchanged. Perfect. Across the aisle, the man lifted his glass. Once. Tom stared at his own reflection in the window. Clear, sharp, normal. But behind him, for just a moment, something moved where nothing should have been. Tom didn't turn. He kept his eyes on the glass, on the world that made sense, on the version of things that held. But something inside him had already shifted. Quietly, irreversibly. Something was wrong. Tom didn't move for a long time, not after the lights returned and not after the sound filled back in. He sat with his hands still around the glass, fingers resting exactly where they had been before everything had shifted. The word felt wrong, too dramatic, too defined for something he couldn't quite hold on to. Around him, the carriage carried on, uninterrupted and untouched. A woman laughed softly 2 tables down, the sound warm and effortless. A server passed by with a tray balanced perfectly in one hand. The low hum of conversation wrapped itself neatly around the space, filling in every gap. Normal. Tom lifted his glass, the ice inside clinking with a sound that was clean, sharp, and real. He took a sip. And I told him that simply wouldn't do. The man across the aisle spoke again. Tom's eyes flicked up. It was the same man, with the same posture and the same easy smile. And I told him that simply wouldn't do. Tom's grip tightened slightly on the glass. The sentence had repeated, not stuttered, not corrected, repeated, exactly. The woman across from the man smiled in response, but it was too quickly, as if she had been waiting for the line. And I told him that simply wouldn't do. Tom set his glass down carefully, the base meeting the table with a soft, controlled tap. Outside, rain continued to trace the window in thin, steady, consistent lines. He watched one droplet slide downward, slow and deliberate, bending slightly with the motion of the train. It reached the edge of the frame and stopped. Tom leaned closer. The droplet held, suspended. Then it slid upward, not fast, not violently. Just wrong. The train shuddered, lightly this time, barely noticeable. The overhead lamps flickered. Not off, but dimmed just enough to dull the gold into something colder. The hum beneath the floor deepened, lower and thicker, as if the sound had to push through something dense to reach him. Tom looked around, but no one reacted. Not the man across the aisle, not the woman smiling too soon, and not the server passing through with her perfectly balanced tray. He turned back to the window. The rain had thickened, and the lines were no longer clean. They blurred, widened, and merged into something heavier. For a moment, just a moment, it didn't look like rain. It looked like pressure. The glass bowed inward slightly. Not enough to break, just enough to feel. Tom's chest tightened, a strange creeping sensation pressed against his ears like the beginning of a deep descent, as if the world around him had sunk just a few feet too far beneath the surface. Then, cut. The lights dropped out completely. This time, the darkness didn't wait, it took the space. No sound, no voices, no hum. Tom's breath came out too loud in the silence. The carriage stretched longer than before, the aisle extending into a vanishing point that shouldn't exist. Empty. Every seat was vacant, every table untouched. The carpet beneath his shoes was no longer just damp. It was wet, the fibers darkened, heavy and absorbing. A drop landed beside his foot, then another, then another. The ceiling above him pulsed with slow, uneven shadows. And far, too far, down the aisle something stood. Still. Tom narrowed his eyes, trying to focus, trying to understand the shape. It didn't move, but it felt aware. Then it shifted, not walking, not stepping, just closer. Tom's breath caught. The outline sharpened into a figure, tall, centered in the aisle, white and dark and precise. The hostess. She was too far to see her face, too far to confirm, but she was there, watching him. The air pressed in tighter, the walls narrowing and the ceiling lowering just enough to make the space feel suffocating, like it was filling with something unseen. Tom took a step back, the sound of his shoe against the soaked carpet echoing too loudly. The figure didn't move, but the distance between them felt smaller. The pressure in his ears built, a low, crushing force that made his jaw tighten and his breath shallow. The windows along the carriage were black. No rain, no reflection, just depth. And somewhere within it, something vast shifted. Tom didn't look long enough to understand it. The light snapped back. Sound slammed into him. Laughter, voices, the hum of the train. The carriage was full again, alive, warm, perfect. Tom stood beside his seat, his hand braced against the table, his drink untouched. No one was looking at him. No one noticed he had moved. Across the aisle, the man lifted his glass. And I told him that simply wouldn't do. Tom's reflection stared back at him from the window, steady, composed, unbroken, but behind him, for just a fraction too long, something white remained where it shouldn't. Still, waiting. Tom blinked and it was gone. The rain continued its steady fall downward. Normal. Tom sat slowly, carefully. He didn't touch his drink, and this time he didn't trust the silence between the sounds. Because now it wasn't empty. It was watching him back. The sound didn't stop. Tom noticed it before he even opened his eyes. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't urgent. It was just consistent. Drip. He sat still, his breath shallow, listening. The carriage was quiet in that controlled way again. Voices were present but distant, softened by the space between tables and the steady rhythm of the train. Normal. Drip. It wasn't coming from above, not exactly. Tom opened his eyes slowly. Everything was as it should be. Warm light, occupied seats, and movement. Drip. It was closer now. His jaw tightened as he looked down. The carpet beneath his shoes was darker than before. Not soaked, not yet, but uneven. It was as if something beneath the surface had begun to spread. He pressed his heel lightly into it. The fibers resisted, then gave just slightly. Drip. Tom stood up. No one reacted. No one even looked up. The man across the aisle continued his conversation, perfectly paced and perfectly composed. A woman further down stirred her drink in slow, identical circles. The hostess was nowhere in sight. Drip. Tom stepped into the aisle and the sound shifted with him. It followed him, not echoing or trailing, but keeping pace. His chest tightened. "Excuse me," he said to no one in particular. His voice sounded distant and muted, as if it had to travel through something thicker than air to reach the space around him. No one responded. Drip. Tom turned slowly. Behind him, there was nothing. The aisle stretched as it should, finite and occupied. He took another step. Drip. Closer. Tom's hand rose unconsciously to the back of his neck. It was cold, not imagined, not subtle. A presence. It was the faintest whisper of air against his skin, like breath. Tom froze, every instinct in him locked in place. Slowly, too slowly, he turned his head. Nothing. Just the warm glow of the carriage and the soft murmur of conversation, the illusion of safety, but the feeling didn't leave. It lingered just behind him, just outside his vision. Watching. Drip. Tom forced himself forward, each step measured and controlled. The aisle felt longer than it had before, not dramatically, not enough to prove, but enough to question. He passed a window and caught his reflection. He stopped. His image stared back, composed and still, but the angle was wrong. He leaned slightly, and the reflection didn't follow immediately. There was a delay, small, barely there. Then it corrected. Tom's breath hitched. He stepped closer, the glass fogged faintly where his breath met it. For a moment, just a moment, his reflection didn't blink when he did. Tom stepped back. Drip. The sound was louder now, closer. He turned fast this time. Nothing, but the carpet behind him was darker. A spreading shape creeping outward in uneven lines as if something had been standing there, watching him. Tom swallowed hard. Enough, he murmured under his breath. Grounding, control, rational thought. This is nothing, a misfire of perception. Fatigue, pressure. Drip. No, not nothing. Tom turned sharply toward the source. The ceiling above him was unchanged, perfect and dry, and yet a drop fell directly in front of him. Then another and another. Each one landed in the exact same spot, precise, measured, intentional. Tom stepped back, but the drops followed. They weren't falling from above. They were appearing as if the space itself had begun to leak. The lights flickered. Not fully, not yet. Just enough. The warmth dimmed, and for a brief, fragile second, the carriage felt cold. Tom exhaled sharply. "Sir." The voice came from his right. He turned, and the hostess was standing beside him. Closer than she should have been, closer than she had ever been. Her posture was perfect. Her uniform was untouched and completely dry. Her eyes met his, calm and understanding, as if she had been watching him the entire time. "You seem unsettled," Tom stared at her. The dripping stopped. The carpet beneath him was normal again, and the air was warm. "I'm fine," he said too quickly. Her head tilted slightly, not questioning or doubting, just noting. There was a small pause, and then a smile. It was polite and measured, but it wasn't quite the same as before. It held a fraction too long, a fraction too still, and something in it, just beneath the surface, felt like recognition. "Of course," she said softly. She stepped past him. Tom didn't move. He didn't breathe. As she passed, the air shifted. Cold, just for a moment, just enough to feel. Drip. Tom's eyes snapped downward. The carpet was still dry, but the sound had returned. And this time, it wasn't coming from the train. It was coming from inside his head. Tom never saw it happen. One moment, warm light, voices, and the controlled rhythm of the train. The next, pressure. It slammed into him. His ears popped violently, a sharp internal crack that stole his breath mid-inhale. The world didn't fade. It compressed, folding inward as if the space itself had been forced too deep, too fast. Darkness swallowed everything. Not absence, not emptiness. Wait. Tom staggered. His hand shot out, catching the edge of a table, but it wasn't the smooth, polished surface from before. It was soaked. His palm slipped as cold water slicked across his skin. The air felt thick. Every breath dragged, heavy, as if it had to be pulled through something denser than it should be. Tom straightened slowly. The carriage stretched endlessly ahead of him, longer than before, far longer. The aisle disappeared into a suffocating dark that felt too complete to be shadow, empty. Every seat was unoccupied, every table was abandoned. Water dripped steadily from everywhere. Thin streams traced down the walls, and droplets gathered along the edges of seats before falling in uneven rhythms to the soaked carpet below. Drip, drip, drip. Tom swallowed hard. The motion felt wrong. His throat tight and dry in a place that should have been drowning. He took a step forward. The carpet gave beneath his shoe, offering a wet, dragging resistance that clung to him. The lights overhead flickered, dim and pale. Faint strips of failing illumination barely reached the edges of the carriage. Everything beyond them was gone. The windows to his right were no longer windows. They were walls of black. Not reflective, not transparent, just depth. Something massive pressed against them. Not touching, not quite, but there. Tom's gaze snapped away. He didn't want to understand it. He didn't want to give it shape, because something in him knew. If he saw it clearly, it would see him back. Drip. Closer now. Tom stopped. The sound had changed, isolated and singular. Behind him, slowly, too slowly, he turned. The aisle stretched the same way behind him, endless and empty. But there, a figure stood several rows back, still, centered in the aisle. The hostess. She was closer than before, close enough to see her posture and her hands folded neatly in front of her. Her uniform was perfect, untouched, dry. Completely, impossibly dry. Tom didn't speak. He couldn't. The distance between them felt wrong. Not far enough, not close enough. It was as if the space between them was deciding where to be. She tilted her head in a slow, measured, curious motion, as if observing something she had been expecting. Tom took a step back, the water dragging at his shoe. She didn't move, but the distance shortened. Tom's breath caught. He stepped back again. The lights flickered harder now, and the pressure in his ears surged, a deep, crushing force that made his vision tighten at the edges. The windows behind her shifted. For just a moment, the black gave way to motion. Something vast was moving, slow and curving past the glass with a weight that bent the space around it. The hostess didn't turn or acknowledge it. Her eyes stayed on him, always on him. And then she smiled. It wasn't polite. It felt like she had been waiting. "You're going the wrong way." Her voice carried perfectly, unaffected by the distance. Tom shook his head. No, the word felt small and useless. The lights flickered, and she was closer. No movement, no step, just closer. Tom stumbled back as the aisle warped and the space behind him stretched and folded. The pressure built. The water on the floor rippled outward from something unseen. The windows bowed inward, and something outside turned. Tom didn't mean to look, but he did, and for a single breaking second, he saw it. Not clearly, never clearly, but enough. Too many limbs, too large, too close. Watching. The lights snapped. Everything collapsed. Sound returned in a violent rush. Warmth, voices, laughter. Tom lurched forward, catching himself on the edge of his table. Dry, completely dry. The carriage was full and perfect again. His breath came sharp and too loud, but no one noticed. Across the aisle. And I told him that simply wouldn't do. Tom's hands trembled. He forced them still, forced his breathing to slow. Control. Normal. The window beside him showed his reflection, clear and composed, but behind him, for just a moment, the lights flickered in the glass. And the aisle was still empty. Tom didn't sit right away, even after the warmth returned and the voices settled back into their careful rhythm. He stood beside his seat, listening, waiting for something to break again. But nothing did. The carriage moved as it should. People spoke, glasses clinked, and the low hum beneath his feet carried on. Steady, reliable, and perfect. Too perfect. Tom lowered himself slowly into his seat, every movement deliberate and measured. His hand rested beside the glass. He didn't touch it. He didn't trust it. Across the aisle. And I told him that simply wouldn't do. Tom closed his eyes briefly and counted. 1, 2, 3. And I told him that simply wouldn't do. He opened them again. The man smiled, the woman laughed. The moment landed exactly as it had before. No variation, no deviation. Tom leaned back slightly. "Stop," he murmured under his breath. No one reacted. Of course they didn't. He turned his head toward the window. Rain slid downward in clean, uninterrupted lines, normal, consistent. He watched his reflection instead, the shape of his face, the set of his shoulders, and the tension he hadn't realized he was holding in his jaw. He exhaled slowly. The reflection followed. Perfect. Tom tilted his head slightly. The reflection stayed still, just for a fraction of a second, then corrected. Tom froze. His pulse kicked hard against his ribs as he leaned closer. The glass fogged faintly where his breath met it. The reflection stared back. Still, not delayed, not wrong. Just watching. Tom blinked. The reflection didn't. His breath caught as, very slowly, the reflection's lips parted. Tom didn't move. He didn't breathe. The version of him in the glass leaned forward, just slightly closer than he was. You shouldn't be here. The voice didn't come from the reflection. It came from behind him. Tom jerked back, turning sharply. The carriage remained intact. Full, alive, and unchanged. No one was standing behind him. No one was even looking at him. And I told him that simply wouldn't do. Tom's chest rose and fell too quickly now. He turned back to the window. His reflection was normal, composed and unbroken. No parted lips, no movement, no sign of anything wrong. Tom stared at it, waiting, daring it. Nothing happened. The rain continued its steady fall downward. Normal. Tom leaned back in his seat. Too fast. The motion felt wrong the moment it happened. The world didn't match it. The hum beneath him lagged just slightly. The sound of glass was late. The voices were half a second behind. It was as if everything had slipped out of sync. Tom gripped the edge of the table, and the delay snapped back. Everything aligned again. Perfect. Too perfect. Sir? Tom didn't turn right away. He knew that voice now. He could feel it, standing too close, waiting. He turned. The hostess stood beside him, closer than before, always closer. Her uniform was flawless, dry, and untouched by anything. Her eyes met his, calm and knowing. You look tired, she said softly. Tom swallowed. I'm fine. Again, always the same answer. Her head tilted slightly, a familiar, repetitive motion now, like everything else. You keep saying that. The words landed gently, too gently. Tom stared at her. You keep watching me, he said. The moment the words left his mouth, something shifted, not the lights or the sound, but the space. The air between them tightened. The hum beneath the train deepened. Low and heavy, her expression didn't change, but something beneath it did. I've always been here, she said. Simple, certain. Tom shook his head. No. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure. Her gaze held his, unblinking and steady. You just started noticing? The lights flickered, soft and brief, but enough. Tom's breath caught because for that single flicker, her reflection appeared in the window, standing behind him before she should have been there, before the world had time to place her. Tom turned fast, but she was already where she should be, beside him, perfect and unmoved. You're out of place, she said quietly. The words slipped under his skin. Not loud, not sharp, just certain, like a truth he hadn't realized he already knew. Tom's hand tightened against the table. The surface beneath his fingers felt damp. He looked down. Dry. He looked back up, and she was smiling. Not wide, not obvious, but there, lingering too long. And for the first time, it didn't feel like she was watching him. It felt like she was waiting for him to understand something. Something he wasn't ready to see. Something that had already found him. It didn't wait this time. There was no flicker and no warning. One moment, Tom's hand gripped the edge of the table with the hostess standing beside him, her smile lingering just a fraction too long. The next, wait. It crushed down on him. The air vanished from his lungs in a sharp, choking pull as the world folded inward again. The pressure came faster this time, harder, forcing itself into his ears, his chest, and behind his eyes. Darkness surged. Not empty, but full. The carriage stretched endlessly ahead of him, longer than it had ever been, but it wasn't empty anymore. Water covered the floor. Not a thin layer, but deep. It surged around his ankles, cold and heavy, resisting his movement as he staggered forward. The carpet beneath it pulsed faintly, as if something beneath the surface was breathing. Tom's breath came sharp and uneven. No. The word broke apart in his throat. The air was wrong. Too thick and too tight. Each inhale dragged, like pulling breath through a narrowing space. The lights overhead flickered weakly, long, dying strips of pale illumination that barely reached the center of the aisle. Everything beyond them was gone. Tom turned in a slow, panicked circle. The carriage behind him was empty, but the carriage ahead was not. Figures stood in the distance, not clear or fully formed, but there, moving, fast. Too fast. One of them ran toward him. Tom's heart slammed against his ribs as the figure sharpened, closing the distance. It was him. Tom stumbled back, water splashing violently around his legs as the other version of himself sprinted forward, eyes locked straight ahead. Not at him, but through him. They should have collided, but the figure passed through him like smoke. Gone. Tom staggered as another shape moved further down the aisle, walking this time, slow, deliberate. Another version of him. Head down, focused, unaware. Tom turned sharply. More. Different versions, running, walking, standing still. All of them him, all of them moving in directions that didn't align. The water rippled violently around their legs, but none of them reacted. None of them saw him. Tom backed away. No, the word felt smaller now, useless. The windows shifted. Not black anymore, but clear. For the first time they were clear, and beyond them lay the ocean. Endless, dark, and pressing in from every side. The train wasn't moving through it. It was buried in it. Still, sinking. Tom's breath caught as something moved outside. Massive, too close. The water around him surged, the pressure in his chest tightened, and then he saw it. Outside the glass. Hands pressing against it. Human, desperate. Tom's stomach dropped as the face came into view, distorted by the water. Panicked. Pounding against the glass, mouth open, screaming. And it was him. Tom staggered forward. No, no! The The version of him outside slammed his fists against the glass again and again and again. The sound didn't carry, but Tom felt it, a deep, hollow impact that echoed through his chest instead of his ears. The outside version of him mouthed something. Tom moved closer. "What?" The words on the other side were frantic, broken, then clear. "Let me in." Tom froze. The water surged higher around his legs as the pressure built and the glass bowed inward. The outside version of him pressed closer, eyes wide and terrified. "Let me in." Tom's hand lifted toward the glass, slow and uncertain. If he touched it, if he let him in. The lights flickered violently, the water churned. The other versions of him stopped, all of them, every single one. Still, watching. Tom's breath caught because they weren't looking at the glass. They were looking at him. The outside version of him screamed silently, pounding harder, desperate. "Let me in." Tom's hand hovered inches from the glass as the pressure built and the world strained. And then, a voice, soft, close. "Don't." Tom's head snapped to the side. The hostess stood beside him, dry, untouched, perfect. Her eyes moved from him to the version of him outside the glass, then back. "That one doesn't belong here," she said quietly. Tom stared at her. "What do you mean?" The glass cracked. A sharp fracture split outward beneath the outside version's hands. The water pressed harder. The thing in the distance shifted. Tom's chest tightened. "What happens if I don't?" Her gaze held his, calm, certain. "It stays out there." Another crack. The glass bowed inward. The outside version of him screamed, "Let me in." And Tom's hand trembled, hovering, caught between something he didn't understand and something he felt was worse. The light snapped out. Everything collapsed. Sound, pressure, water, gone. Tom slammed forward, catching himself against the table. Dry, perfect. The carriage was full again. Alive, normal. His chest heaved. His hand was still raised, but now it was touching nothing. Across the aisle. "And I told him that simply wouldn't do." Tom slowly lowered his hand. The window beside him was just glass, with rain sliding down normally, but for a single, lingering second, his reflection didn't match him. It was still reaching, still pressing, still trying to get in. The train began to slow. Tom felt it before he saw it. Not the jolt of braking or a shift in speed, but a subtle easing. The hum beneath his feet softened, and the rhythm changed even as everything else stayed the same. The voices, the light, and the careful, contained movement of the carriage. Perfect. Tom sat very still, his hands resting on the table, dry and steady, though he didn't remember placing them there. The glass in front of him sat untouched, the liquid inside perfectly still. Across the aisle. And I told him that simply wouldn't do. Tom didn't look. He didn't need to. He already knew. The train slowed further. Outside, the rain began to thin and the gray sky softened until shapes emerged beyond the glass. Indistinct at first, then clearer. A platform, station lights glowed faintly through the mist, still and empty. Tom's chest tightened. Something about it felt wrong. Not dangerous or threatening, but unfinished. Like something had been left behind. The train came to a complete stop. The hum beneath him faded, and a silence settled. Not heavy or oppressive, but final. Tom exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders loosening just slightly. He glanced down at his sleeve. Dry. Of course it was. Everything was. A soft sound broke the stillness. A step, measured and familiar. Tom looked up. The hostess stood beside his table, exactly where she had been at the very beginning. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture perfect, and she was completely, impossibly dry. Her expression was calm, professional, and unchanged. "You've arrived," she said gently. Tom stared at her. For a moment he didn't move or speak because something deep and quiet in him hesitated. It wasn't fear or panic. It was recognition. He stood slowly, the movement feeling too easy, as if something had already decided it for him. The aisle was normal again. Finite and occupied, people gathered their belongings, conversations resumed, and the world moved forward. Tom stepped into the aisle. Nothing shifted, no flicker, no pressure, no water. He walked toward the exit, each step grounded and measured. The door at the end of the carriage stood open, and beyond it lay the platform, still and waiting. Tom paused just before stepping through. The air felt thin, not heavy or suffocating, but light, like something had been lifted. He stepped off the train. The platform was quiet. There were no crowds and no movement, just distant lights glowing through the mist. Tom turned. The train stood behind him, still, silent, and perfect. For a moment, everything felt right. The journey was over, the tension was gone, and it was a clean end. Tom exhaled, and then something itched. Not a thought or a realization, but a feeling. He looked down at his sleeve, still dry. Of course. But he pressed his fingers against it, and the fabric resisted, then gave, just slightly, like it was heavier than it should be. Tom stilled. Slowly, he lifted his hand. The faintest sheen of moisture clung to his fingertips, only to vanish in the next second as if it had never been there. Tom's chest tightened. He turned back toward the train. The hostess stood in the doorway, watching him. Her posture was perfect, and her expression was calm, the same as before. Tom held her gaze, waiting for something, anything. Her lips curved softly and politely into that same measured smile she had worn since the beginning. Tom looked away. The platform stretched out before him, still, quiet, and safe. He took a step forward, then stopped. Something in him pulled. He turned back again. The hostess hadn't moved. Her smile was still there, lingering just a fraction too long. Tom stared, because now he could see it. Not the smile, but what sat beneath it. Something patient, something that had never been concerned, something that had always known exactly where he would end up. Tom's breath caught as the train doors began to close. Slow, measured, The gap narrowed, but her gaze never left him. The smile never faded. Not even as the doors sealed shut, not even as the train pulled away, and not even as the lights disappeared into the mist. Tom stood alone on the platform. The quiet settled around him, still and complete. He exhaled slowly, turned, and walked forward. The sound followed him. Faint. Almost nothing. Drip. Tom stopped. The platform was dry. The air was still. There was nothing above him and nothing around him. Drip. Closer. Tom's breath slowed, careful and measured. He didn't turn. He didn't look. Because something in him knew he wouldn't see it. Not directly, not anymore. Drip. Tom continued walking. The sound followed, steady, consistent, and unseen. And somewhere, far beneath the surface of everything, something vast shifted. Waiting. Patient. Unfinished.